The soft amber lighting of Bellevue shimmered through its floor-to-ceiling windows. But tonight, something felt different. Not richer, not louder, just more human. The grand piano gleamed under the spotlight, not just a centerpiece now, but a sacred space. Guests weren't simply eating tonight. They were waiting. At precisely 8 p.m., the room hushed. A familiar figure emerged from backstage. No longer in a waitress uniform, Janelle Brooks now wore a sleek black gown, elegant and understated. Her hair swept back, posture upright, presence commanding. She stepped forward as naturally as a queen would take her throne. MC VO gently into mic. Please welcome tonight's featured artist, Ms. Janelle Brooks. Thunderous applause rose, but it wasn't just loud. It was personal. The kind of applause that had memory in it. Seated closest to the piano, her mother beamed, dressed in a soft lavender wrap, healthier than she'd looked in years. The treatment funded by the foundation had worked wonders. Mrs. Brooks clutched a small bouquet of white daisies, the same flowers she used to bring Janelle at Carnegie. MRS Brooks whispering, "You came back stronger than ever." Tears shimmered in her eyes but didn't fall. Phones were already out, not to document gossip, but to preserve a moment, because the video from that night, the one where a millionaire dared a black waitress to play piano as a joke, had reached 28 million views. But tonight wasn't about that night. It was about everything after. Janelle sat on the bench and took one deep breath. Her hands hovered above the keys, not trembling, not uncertain, just reverent. Janelle into mic. 3 months ago, I hadn't touched the piano in 3 years. I had stopped believing there was a future where music and caregiving could coexist. Janelle, but the thing about truth is, it always finds its way back. Even when buried beneath grief, fatigue, or fear. Even when mocked. She paused, glanced toward her mother. Janelle, this performance is for those who were told they were too late, too poor, too invisible. It's for the voices muted in quiet rooms and loud systems. Janelle, smiling. Tonight, I play not because I was challenged, but because I was chosen. By the music. Again. The room leaned in. Then, she began. Soft, lush, poetic. The first notes floated like memory. Unlike the powerful, defiant Chopin from before, this piece was gentler, like a prayer whispered at midnight. Her fingers glided as if reconnecting with an old language. The audience stilled, breath held in harmony with each note. From the kitchen to the balcony, from reporters to billionaires, there was no clinking of forks, no murmurs of wine pairings, just silence. Dominic sat next to Professor Linwood, eyes glassy, hands clasped. Dominic, softly, she rebuilt something I thought I broke. Professor Linwood, watching. You didn't break it. You revealed it. Dominic, I just want to forget where I came from. I weaponized power the way it had been used on me. Professor, and now, Dominic, now, I want to pass it forward, not as power, but as protection. At one table, the young couple who invited Janelle to play at their wedding smiled, holding hands. At another, a middle school violinist watched with wide eyes, her mother wiping a tear beside her. Near the back, 3 young men in Bellevue aprons, new staff, interns in the Foundation's mentorship program, stood still, witnessing the very future they'd once thought out of reach. As the final arpeggio fell, Janelle's hands lingered above the keys, not in hesitation, but in completion. She closed her eyes, bowed her head, and let the last note float away like smoke. Silence. And then, like a thunderclap, applause. Janelle stood and bowed. Then she walked directly to the edge of the stage, stepped down, and returned to her mother's side. Together, hand in hand, they rose. The room followed suit. Standing ovation. MRS Brooks, smiling proud. You gave them music. But more than that, you gave them you. A conservatory student opens a scholarship letter. Second Voice Initiative, full ride. A struggling violinist in Detroit records her first studio session. A jazz pianist in New Orleans wipes tears at a Bellevue screening night. Janelle at a middle school, helping a student adjust posture at a piano. Dominic handing over deeds, not for real estate, but for converted art spaces. The restaurant had emptied, the city humming outside. Janelle stood once more at the piano, alone now, in the quiet. She placed her fingertips on the keys, but didn't play. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a handwritten card. She left it on the music stand. It read, "To the girl who was mocked, who bent but didn't break. This is your stage now. Play forever." The lights of Bellevue glowed from its high-rise window like a beacon. Inside, the echoes of the night lingered, not just in memory, but in movement, because a millionaire had tried to make a black waitress play piano as a joke. And her talent hadn't just left everyone in awe, it had left them changed. Forever. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button to follow more powerful stories like this. Like the video if Janelle's journey inspired you. Share it with someone who believes in second chances and hidden talents. And don't forget to turn on notifications, because the next story might just change the way you see the world. The late evening glow through the frosted windows of Maison de Lumière painted golden halos on the white linen-covered tables. Waiters moved like practiced dancers, balancing crystals, silver, and porcelain under the soft hum of jazz playing from hidden speakers. The restaurant was full, power brokers and their companions murmuring over truffle risottos and rare vintages. To Andre Miles, it was a stage he knew too well. One where he performed nightly, not with piano keys, but with platters and politeness. But tonight, a new presence shifted the atmosphere, like a sudden change in tempo. The double doors opened with a hiss, and in swept a woman who made the maitre d' stand straighter, his voice catching slightly in his throat. Celine Marquette didn't just walk into rooms. She entered them like thunder in a designer gown. A wealthy widow, real estate magnate, and patron of the arts, she was a kind of woman who used names as weapons and wore silence like a crown. Her presence wasn't loud, but it was total. She wore a floor-length black silk dress that shimmered subtly under the chandelier lights. Her hair crown of silver pulled back into an elegant twist. On her wrist sparkled a diamond-studded Cartier watch. Not to tell time, but to remind others theirs wasn't as valuable. Andre noticed a shift before he even saw her. Conversations dipped. Cutlery slowed. A hush of admiration mixed with fear swept the room like the drawing of a breath before a symphony's downbeat. "That's Celine Marquette," whispered one server to another, both of them frozen near the service station. "She doesn't just dine, she inspects." Andre turned just slightly, catching her out of the corner of his eye as she was escorted to a prime table near the piano. The piano he had admired for months, but had been explicitly told never to touch. Under no circumstances, the manager had said, "That Steinway is reserved for professionals, not staff." As Celine sat, her table companions gathered. For women, all perfectly polished, all trailing laughter like perfume. They were dressed in jewels and sharp smiles, and they glanced around the restaurant like queens surveying a court. Andre continued working, clearing a neighboring table, but he could feel her presence like static. Celine didn't speak loudly, but every word landed like a gavel. She critiqued the seating, asked for a different glass, declined the wine list, and instead asked for something that won't insult my palate. He could feel the glances of other servers, who would be assigned to her. Drawing her table was like playing Russian roulette with your shift. Table 19, the manager called from behind the podium. "Miles, that's you?" Andre froze. Of course. As he smoothed his apron and adjusted the pen in his pocket, he approached her table with all the grace he could muster. It wasn't fear he felt. It was awareness. The kind that comes from knowing you're about to be tested not on your skills, but your composure. "Good evening, ladies," he said, voice calm, professional. "Welcome to Maison de Lumière. May I start you with some drinks?" Celine looked up slowly, and their eyes met. There was the inspection. He wasn't sure what she was measuring. His diction? His posture? His skin? "Champagne," she said coolly. "Your best bottle. We're celebrating." "Oh," Andre asked politely, reaching for his notepad. "Victoria's finally divorced the parasite," Celine said dryly, raising her glass as her friends laughed. "We're toasting to liberation and expensive mistakes." Andre smiled, professional and controlled. Excellent. I'll have that out shortly. As he turned away, he caught her whispering to one of her companions. He's got the hands of a pianist. Shame they're wasted on bread baskets. The word stung, but he didn't flinch. Behind the kitchen door, Maria, the server who trained him, caught his expression. You okay? Andre nodded, his jaw set. She's watching. Oh, she watches everything, but she loves drama. That's what she comes here for. People she can control like strings on a puppet. Don't let her see you blink. He nodded again, more to himself than to her. Throughout the evening, Celine's table became the center of gravity. The laughter too loud, the request too precise, the butter too cold, the steak too warm, the server too quiet. But Andre never stumbled. He was deliberate, smooth, impossibly kind, even under the laser of her gaze. He refilled champagne with a steady hand, removed plates with silent grace. But he also knew something else. She was bored. Beneath all the sharpness and smiles, she was looking for something, or someone. And then she spotted the piano. A slow smirk played at her lips. She leaned toward her friends. They keep that piano over there like it's sacred, untouched. I wonder... Andre felt the shift. When he returned to drop off the dessert menu, her eyes glinted with mischief. You play? She asked out of nowhere. Excuse me, ma'am? That piano. You look like you know your way around it. He hesitated. I study music. Piano? Yes. Celine tapped the rim of her glass. Interesting. But you serve here? Yes, ma'am. How strange, she mused, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. To live so close to your dream, and yet be forced to carry other people's leftovers. Her words were sugar-coated bullets. Andre didn't respond. She leaned forward, eyes sharp as glass. I have a proposition. Play something. Right now. If you impress me, I'll leave you $1,000 tip. If not, she waved her hand. Nothing. The table went still. So did the restaurant. Even the jazz seemed to pause. Andre's pulse thudded his ears. She was doing this to mess with him. He looked at the piano, looked back at her, then at the manager, who stood nearby, frozen like a statue. You don't have to, the manager muttered, stepping close. But she's a friend of the owner. It's complicated. Complicated was a word that didn't come close. This was layered. Power, performance pride, and the twisted theater of social status. She was rich. He was a black waiter. And the stage had never been meant for him. But as he stood there, something shifted. Not in the air, but in him. He looked down at his hands. The same hands she had tried to reduce to silverware and servitude. And then, slowly he walked toward the piano. The walk from Celine Marquette's table to the grand piano in the corner of Maison de Lumière felt like a mile of judgment. Each footstep echoed louder than it should have, not because of the acoustics, but because of the stares. Dozens of diners, forks midair, conversations halted, turned their heads like synchronized spectators at courtroom drama. Andre Miles, a black waiter in a crisp white shirt and polished shoes, wasn't just walking anymore. He was being watched, assessed, and in some cases, silently doubted. Not because he was clumsy. He wasn't. Not because he was unknown. He had worked here for months. But because the piano he approached was a symbol of wealth, talent, and exclusivity. One not meant to be touched by staff, much less played by someone like him. I can't believe she's doing this, Maria whispered from behind the server station, peeking through the partition. This is either going to be the best moment of his life or the worst. The piano was a Steinway Model D, hand-polished mahogany, perched beneath a chandelier like a crown jewel. It was more than an instrument. It was sacred territory in the world of high society dining. And it had rules. No staff is to play the piano under any circumstances, the manager, Mr. Laurent, had said during orientation. It's for higher performers only. But now, Mr. Laurent stood by Celine's table, face tense, sweat glistening at his temple. Is everything all right here? He asked in a hushed, urgent voice. Oh, perfectly, Celine answered, her voice calm but edged with satisfaction. Your waiter's about to entertain us. He's very talented, isn't he? Mr. Laurent looked at Andre, searching his eyes. A pause. Then he leaned in close and whispered, "You don't have to do this, but she's close with the owner. If you say no, well, it could get messy." Andre nodded, though inside his chest, war drums pounded. He had not come to work tonight planning to reveal his soul. "Andre," Celine called sweetly across the room, $1,000 is a generous tip for a few minutes of your time. Or perhaps you're not quite as gifted as your hand suggests." The room exhaled. She said it. She wanted to mess with him. The rich woman had crafted a trap. Turn her dining experience into a stage and her target, a black waiter, into unwilling entertainment. It wasn't about music. It was about power. Her game had one rule: perform and she might reward you. Fail and she would forget you. Andre stood at the edge of the stage she built for him, heart pounding, throat dry. He thought of the tips he needed to cover next month's rent, of the tuition payment, looming over him like storm clouds. Of Professor Hughes, who had once said, "Your hands were born for Chopin, but your soul needs silence to speak." He took a deep breath and turned to Mr. Laurent. "If I play," he asked, "am I going to get fired?" Mr. Laurent hesitated. Then, reluctantly, "Not tonight." Andre gave a single nod. He walked the final steps of the piano, brushing his fingers across the polished wood, feeling the tension radiate off every onlooker. The bench creaked slightly as he sat down, adjusting the height with a quiet twist of the knob beneath. His fingers hovered above the keys, suspended in the space between surrender and defiance. He closed his eyes. He remembered the last time he played in front of people. It was in a small recital hall, with maybe 30 attendees, half of them other students. He had fumbled the middle section. His nerves had gotten the better of him. He had promised himself he wouldn't play publicly again until he was ready. But readiness was a luxury. Tonight wasn't about preparation. It was about reclaiming. Andre let out a slow breath. Then he started playing. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade number, one emerged like a whisper. Gentle, probing, like a voice trying to find its strength. The keys felt colder than he remembered, but the muscle memory kicked in. His fingers moved with practiced familiarity, drawing from a well he had forgotten he possessed. In the far corner, Celine raised her glass slowly, her expression unreadable. The music grew. Soft ripples turned to urgent cascades. Melodies intertwined, swelling with the weight of emotion and unspoken history. Every chord was a declaration. Every transition, a risk. This wasn't a performance. It was a battle. A black waiter pushed into a spotlight he hadn't asked for. A rich woman playing with reputations as casually as she played with silverware. A piano that had remained silent now speaking truth in every vibrating string. The diners who had initially smirked were now motionless. Even the kitchen staff, visible through the pass-through window, had stopped mid-prep, eyes locked on the unfolding scene. Andre's body swayed with the tempo. His expression shifted from calm to storm. Each note revealed more than talent. It revealed pain, discipline, beauty. When he reached the climactic middle section, he didn't hold back. He attacked the keys with fire, precision, and a hint of rage. It wasn't anger at Celine alone. It was anger at every room that had doubted him, every gate that had closed before he could knock. Every time he was seen as a waiter and not a musician, the music resolved. Final chords echoed like the aftermath of a truth bomb. Silence followed. Andre didn't move. He kept his eyes closed. Then applause. First one person, then another, then everyone. The restaurant erupted. Chairs scraped back as people stood. Diners clapped like jurors announcing a unanimous verdict. When Andre opened his eyes, Celine was still seated, her champagne untouched. Her face less composed now. He stood, gave a short bow, then stepped away from the piano. As he passed her table, she reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. "You earned this," she said, writing a check with a practiced flourish. She tore it off and handed it to him. It read, $1,000. Below it, she slid forward a cream-colored card. "Call me tomorrow," she said quietly. "This is my personal line." Andre took the card. He nodded once. No thank you. No smile. He walked away. And behind him, the room that had once watched in doubt now watched in awe. The walk from Celine Marquette's table to the grand piano in the corner of Maison de Lumière felt like a mile of judgment. Each footstep echoed louder than it should have, not because of the acoustics, but because of the stares. Dozens of diners, forks midair, conversations halted, turned their heads like synchronized spectators at courtroom drama. Andre Miles, a black waiter in a crisp white shirt and polished shoes, wasn't just walking anymore. He was being watched, assessed, and in some cases, silently doubted. Not because he was clumsy. He wasn't. Not because he was unknown. He had worked here for months. But because the piano he approached was a symbol of wealth, talent, and exclusivity. One not meant to be touched by staff, much less played by someone like him. I can't believe she's doing this, Maria whispered from behind the server's station, peeking through the partition. This is either going to be the best moment of his life, or the worst. The piano was a Steinway Model D, hand-polished mahogany, perched beneath a chandelier like a crown jewel. It was more than an instrument. It was sacred territory in the world of high society dining. And it had rules. No staff is to play the piano under any circumstances, the manager, Mr. Laurent, had said during orientation. It's for hired performers only. But now, Mr. Laurent stood by Celine's table, face tense, sweat glistening at his temple. Is everything all right here? He asked in a hushed, urgent voice. Oh, perfectly, Celine answered, her voice calm but edged with satisfaction. Your waiter's about to entertain us. He's very talented, isn't he? Mr. Laurent looked at Andre, searching his eyes. A pause. Then he leaned in close and whispered, You don't have to do this, but she's close with the owner. If you say no, well, it could get messy. Andre nodded, though inside his chest, war drums pounded. He had not come to work tonight planning to reveal his soul. Andre, Celine called sweetly across the room. $8,000 is a generous tip for a few minutes of your time. Or perhaps you're not quite as gifted as your hand suggests. The room exhaled. She said it. She wanted to mess with him. The rich woman had crafted a trap, turned her dining experience into a stage and her target, a black waiter, into unwilling entertainment. It wasn't about music. It was about power. Her game had one rule: perform, and she might reward you. Fail, and she would forget you. Andre stood at the edge of the stage she built for him, heart pounding, throat dry. He thought of the tips he needed to cover next month's rent, of the tuition payment looming over him like storm clouds. Of Professor Hughes, who had once said, Your hands were born for Chopin, but your soul needs silence to speak. He took a deep breath and turned to Mr. Laurent. If I play, he asked, am I going to get fired? Mr. Laurent hesitated. Then, reluctantly, not tonight. Andre gave a single nod. He walked the final steps to the piano, brushing his fingers across the polished wood, feeling the tension radiate off every onlooker. The bench creaked slightly as he sat down, adjusting the height with a quiet twist of the knob beneath. His fingers hovered above the keys, suspended in the space between surrender and defiance. He closed his eyes. He remembered the last time he played in front of people. It was in a small recital hall, with maybe 30 attendees, half of them other students. He had fumbled the middle section. His nerves had gotten the better of him. He had promised himself he wouldn't play publicly again until he was ready. But readiness was a luxury. Tonight wasn't about preparation. It was about reclaiming. Andre let out a slow breath. Then he started playing. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade number, one emerged like a whisper, gentle, probing, like a voice trying to find its strength. The keys felt colder than he remembered, but the muscle memory kicked in. His fingers moved with practiced familiarity, drawing from a well he had forgotten he possessed. In the far corner, Celine raised her glass slowly, her expression unreadable. The music grew. Soft ripples turned to urgent cascades. Melodies intertwined, swelling with the weight of emotion and unspoken history. Every chord was a declaration. Every transition, a risk. This wasn't a performance. It was a battle. A black waiter pushed into a spotlight he hadn't asked for. A rich woman playing with reputations, as casually as she played with silverware. A piano that had remained silent now speaking truth in every vibrating string. The diners who had initially smirked were now motionless. Even the kitchen staff, visible through the pass-through window, had stopped mid-prep, eyes locked on the unfolding scene. Andre's body swayed with the tempo. His expression shifted from calm to storm. Each note revealed more than talent. It revealed pain, discipline, beauty. When he reached the climactic middle section, he didn't hold back. He attacked the keys with fire, precision, and a hint of rage. It wasn't anger at Celine alone. It was anger at every room that had doubted him, every gate that had closed before he could knock. Every time he was seen as a waiter and not a musician, the music resolved. Final chords echoed like the aftermath of a truth bomb. Silence followed. Andre didn't move. He kept his eyes closed. Then applause. First one person, then another, then everyone. The restaurant erupted. Chairs scraped back as people stood. Diners clapped like jurors, announcing a unanimous verdict. When Andre opened his eyes, Celine was still seated, her champagne untouched. Her face, less composed now. He stood, gave a short bow, then stepped away from the piano. As he passed her table, she reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. "You earned this," she said, writing a check with a practiced flourish. She tore it off and handed it to him. It read, $1,000. Below it, she slid forward a cream-colored card. "Call me tomorrow," she said quietly. "This is my personal line." Andre took the card. He nodded once. No thank you. No smile. He walked away. And behind him, the room that had once watched in doubt now watched in awe. The silence of Maison de Lumière was unlike anything Andre Miles had ever felt. The crystal chandeliers above no longer sparkled with idle chatter or clinking silverware. Every eye in the room was on him. A black waiter, now seated at a piano he was never meant to touch. His fingers hovered above the keys, trembling only slightly. The spotlight that once felt like judgment now softened, becoming something else entirely. Possibility. He took a slow breath. Then he started playing. The first few notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1, in G minor, emerged like whispers of a memory. A delicate melody, almost questioning, tiptoed to the dining room. The room didn't just listen. It leaned in. It was a kind of silence that didn't ask for permission, only presence. Andre's fingers moved with a blend of hesitation and familiarity. For a moment, he wasn't sure if his hands would remember. He hadn't had time to practice in weeks, his nights swallowed by double shifts and aching feet. But muscle memory is a stubborn, miraculous thing. And when driven by something deeper, humiliation, pride, passion, it becomes unstoppable. The piano, a gleaming Steinway grand, responded like an old friend reunited. Each key pressed became a conversation, each chord a declaration. Andre didn't need to speak. He didn't need to explain why a black waiter dared to sit where only professionals were allowed. The music said everything. It told the story of late nights spent studying scores under dim apartment lights, of callous fingers and borrowed sheet music, of dreams deferred but never abandoned. It was a testimony of every moment he had swallowed disrespect and smiled through it. It was a quiet rebellion dressed in 16th notes and crescendos. Celine Marquette, the rich woman who had demanded the spectacle, sat rigid at her table. Her smile was gone. In its place, a slowly crumbling expression of confusion. Then awe. Then something that looked remarkably like discomfort. Her friends, who had laughed at her bet, were now motionless. One woman lowered her champagne glass mid-sip, eyes wide. Another gently reached across the table, placing a hand on Celine's wrist. A silent gesture, not of support, but of reckoning. As Andre reached the deeper sections of the piece, the music transformed. It wasn't just beautiful, it was dangerous, emotional, demanding. This was not entertainment. This was confrontation. Each phrase was a mirror to the diners, forcing them to see more than just a waiter in a vest. For the first time, they saw a man, a musician, an artist who had been carrying plates while carrying dreams. The emotional core of the ballade surged forward, urgent, passionate, and raw. Andre's entire body moved now, swaying gently with the rhythm, his brow furrowed, his eyes closed. He wasn't playing for the room anymore. He was playing for himself. And yet, the room followed. From the corner of his eye, Andre caught the kitchen staff peering through the swinging doors. Maria, his co-worker, stood beside the pastry chef, both motionless, hands covering their mouths. Even Mr. Delacroix, the no-nonsense restaurant manager who had once said, "Stick to your section, not the Steinway," now stood near the entrance, arms crossed tightly, mouth parted slightly. The piece reached a climax, a haunting flurry of notes that built like a rising tide. Andre's wrist ached, but he ignored it. His heart pounded in time with the accelerando. This was the most alive he had felt in months. When the final cascade of notes tumbled down the keyboard like a waterfall, he let the last chord ring. He held it, not because the music told him to, but because the moment asked for it, demanded it. Then silence, not awkward silence, reverent silence, the kind that follows something holy. For a second, he didn't breathe. He didn't dare look up. Then came the first clap. It was a single, deliberate sound, then another, then a third. Suddenly, the entire room erupted into applause. People stood, napkins dropped, cutlery forgotten. Diners who had looked through him moments ago now reached for their phones, not to record, but to remember. Tears shimmered in the eyes of a young couple seated near the window. An elderly man wiped his glasses and shook his head in disbelief. A little boy near the bar clapped wildly, tugging on his father's coat, whispering, "He's magic." Andre stood slowly from a bench. He gave a small bow, unsure what to do with his hands, or his heart. Then he looked at Celine, the rich woman who had tried to mess with him, who had turned him into a joke, now sat with one manicured hand over her lips. Her face was wet. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely above a whisper. That was unexpected. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a checkbook. Her hands were less steady than before. She wrote quickly, tore the check free, and placed it on the table. Then, without speaking, she slid a business card next to it. Andre stared at the items but didn't move. He didn't need to. This moment wasn't about the money, or even the opportunity. It was about reclaiming the stage, a stage never meant for him, until he made it his. The silence that followed the opening bars of Chopin was a silence Andre had never known before, not even in recital halls. This was different. This was charged, not the hush of respect, but the vacuum of disbelief, the kind that forms when a room full of people simultaneously realizes they've made a mistake. When he started playing, the notes didn't just fill the restaurant. They rewrote its atmosphere. The Maison de Lumière, normally alive with low murmurs and silverware clinks, had become something else entirely. The chandeliers still glowed. The servers still moved. But all now revolved around one axis, a black waiter at a grand piano. Celine Marquette sat at the center table, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. At first, she had leaned back in her chair with that signature smirk, the smug confidence of a rich woman used to controlling any room. She expected awkward fumbling, maybe a few missed notes, and a defeated shrug. Something to laugh at with her friends later. Something to confirm her superiority. But as the music deepened, her smirk faded. Andre's fingers danced with command, not hesitance. His posture wasn't that of a nervous staff member doing something foolish. It was the posture of someone who belonged there. Someone who'd lived in the architecture of melody for years. And every measure he played told that story without words. Celine blinked. The air around her grew colder, though the temperature hadn't changed. One of her companions, Arlette, whispered, "I didn't know he could play like that." Neither did Celine, because she hadn't asked, because she hadn't cared. As Andre transitioned into Ballade's more emotionally complex middle section, there was a palpable shift. Some of the diners, people who had earlier barely acknowledged his presence, now leaned forward in their seats. One woman across the room closed her eyes, tears forming. A man in a tailored suit put down his fork mid-bite and simply stared. Each note undid a stereotype. Each phrase tore down a wall. At the edge of the dining room, Mr. Fontaine, the manager, had also frozen in place. He had initially prepared to rush in, to whisper a polite but firm warning about the piano being off limits. But he couldn't move, couldn't interrupt. Not now, because whatever this was, it wasn't just playing. It was testimony. Andre didn't look at the room, didn't seek their approval. His eyes stayed closed, his face calm but intense. He wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. He had crossed that threshold in the first 30 seconds. Now he was simply living inside the music, letting it cleanse something inside him. But across from him, Celine wasn't being cleansed. She was being unraveled. Memories she hadn't invited returned without warning. The Chopin piece. Of course it was that one. Of all the compositions he could have chosen, it had to be the one Charles had played the night they met. She hadn't heard it in years. Hadn't allowed herself to. Back then, she was Celine Bouvier. Still hopeful. Still humble. The daughter of a music teacher who'd fallen in love with a concert pianist. Charles had played this very piece in a tiny conservatory rehearsal hall, while Celine sat in the back, unnoticed. She remembered the exact moment. How the crescendo had felt like a wave pulling her under. How her breath caught the first major shift in key. She had told herself that love, at first sound, wasn't real. But that night it had been. And now, somehow, the waiter she tried to humiliate was bringing it all back. Every aching detail. The strength of her smirk had vanished. Her spine no longer straightened with confidence, but stiffened under the weight of emotion. She placed her glass down, fingers trembling slightly. She couldn't look away. Andre's hands moved with impossible precision, yet the music still breathed, still ached. It wasn't perfection. It was humanity. It was memory and longing and pain stitched into harmony. And as the piece approached its climax, Celine finally understood. She hadn't orchestrated a moment. She'd been invited into one. And it didn't belong to her. Her companions were silent now too. Even the usual gossip and wine-fueled chuckles had vanished. The table had become a church pew. Arlette glanced over and noticed a change in Celine's face. "Are you all right?" she whispered. Celine didn't answer, because she wasn't sure. What did it mean that the boy she dismissed could resurrect something so powerful from within her? What did it say about the world she lived in, that no one had ever seen him until now, until he bared his soul through keys crafted centuries ago? As the final phrases of Chopin's ballade trailed into soft silence, Andre's hands lifted slowly from the keys. His breathing was steady. He still hadn't opened his eyes. The room remained frozen for a heartbeat. Then another, and finally, the first clap. It came from the back. Then another, and another, a rising wave of applause, rolling through the restaurant like thunder across marble. Celine stayed seated, but her hands moved. She clapped, and in that gesture, something inside her cracked. It wasn't redemption. Not yet, but it was a beginning. A rich woman had tried to mess with a black waiter. But when he started playing, the show she expected became a revelation she hadn't earned, and no one in that room would ever see either of them the same way again. The air inside Maison de Lumière hung heavy, as if each note Andre played weighed down the chandeliers, pressing silence onto every guest's shoulders. His fingers moved with delicate purpose, flowing through Chopin's Ballade No. 1 like it was the only language left in the world that made sense. As the tempo deepened, so did the spell. The clinking of silverware had long ceased. Waitstaff stood frozen just beyond the kitchen doors. Diners who'd once ignored the black waiter with disdain now leaned forward, as if witnessing a verdict about to be delivered. Andre didn't see them. He didn't need to. He could feel them. Their stunned stillness, their breath caught somewhere between curiosity and revelation. Every note he struck was a hammer on the wall that had kept him in the shadows. Now, the room became a courtroom, and he was no longer the servant on trial. He was the judge. Across the room, Celine Marquette sat as if she'd just heard the voice of someone long gone. Her champagne flute trembled in her fingers. The sparkle in her jewelry dulled under the weight of memory. Her plan to mess with him had started as a rich woman's whim. But when he started playing, something in her cracked. First, it was surprise, then discomfort, and now, unmistakable emotion. The piece transitioned into its middle section, complex, urgent, emotionally exposed. Andre leaned into the piano as if surrendering his entire being. His right hand darted across octaves like wind over a stormy sea, while his left grounded each cascade of melody in thunderous chords. Every ounce of pain, rejection, resilience, it all spilled into the room. A single tear escaped down Celine's cheek. It was so quiet, the drop of liquid seemed to echo. She didn't wipe it away. Instead, her gaze stayed fixed on Andre, her lips parted slightly. Her friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly unsure of the woman they came to laugh with. One of them reached gently for her elbow, but Celine didn't respond, because now this wasn't a show. It was a reckoning. It was a night she realized that her cruelty had summoned something sacred. Mr. Pellegrin, the restaurant manager, stood near the maitre d's podium, his jaw slack, his heart pounding with something that felt dangerously close to pride. He had feared the worst when Celine pulled her stunt, but now he, like everyone else, had been silenced by something raw and real. When the final stretch of ballade began, a hush even deeper settled. Andre's entire body moved with the rhythm, his eyes closed, sweat glistening along his temples. The rich wood of the Steinway resonated like a cathedral organ. Each key was both a cry and an answer. By the time he struck the last powerful chord, the room had ceased breathing. The silence after the final note lingered, not because they were unsure what to do, but because no one wanted to be the first to break the spell. Andre's hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. His chest heaved. Then, slowly, he looked up. It was Celine who clapped first. A single, hollow clap. Then another. Then the entire dining room followed like a tidal wave crashing to the veil of class, prejudice, and silence. People stood, applauded. Some even wept. Andre rose from the bench, unsure what to feel. Relief, exhaustion, triumph. The applause wasn't just polite. It was eruptive. It was as if every table had suddenly realized they'd witnessed something historic. Back at her table, Celine stood too, her posture trembling. She reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a sleek, cream-colored checkbook. Her manicured hand scribbled something quickly. And then, as Andre walked slowly past, she reached out, not with mockery this time, but reverence. $1,000, she said, her voice steadier than it had any right to be. As promised. She held out the check between two fingers. But that wasn't all. With her other hand, she slipped a business card onto the table. This is my direct number. Call me. Andre looked at the check, then at the card. His hands didn't move. The whole restaurant watched, breathless. Was this a new game? Another trick? But Celine's eyes, they were different now. They weren't demanding. They were pleading. And for the first time that night, Andre spoke, his voice barely louder than the piano's softest note. Thank you, he said, not with gratitude, but with grace. As he walked back toward the kitchen, the applause began again. This time it was for the black waiter who had just reminded them all, through music, through pain, through fire, that legacy doesn't wear a tuxedo. It's born in the back hallways, waiting for its moment to break through. The final note wasn't just the end of a song. It was the beginning of something bigger. For a heartbeat after the last note of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 faded into silence, time seemed suspended. The air in Maison de Lumière was thick with emotion no one could quite articulate. Andre's hands hovered above the Steinway's keys, trembling ever so slightly. Not from fear, but from the release of everything he'd held inside. He didn't dare look up. He didn't want to see pity or confusion. He had given the piano everything he had, his dignity, his exhaustion, his pain, and above all, his truth. Then, like a match catching flame, a single clap broke through the stillness. From a far corner of the restaurant, a man in a tailored navy suit brought his hands together slowly, deliberately. A second later, another joined, then another. In a matter of moments, the room ignited in thunderous applause. Diners rose to their feet. Crystal glasses clinked as hands came together. A fork dropped to the floor, but when unnoticed, every table was standing. Every guest, whether billionaire or socialite, critic, or innocent bystander, was now an audience member to something much more than dinner theater. Andre lifted his eyes. He wasn't a black waiter anymore. He wasn't an anonymous server in a tux shirt. He was a pianist. He stood from the bench and gave a small bow, his chest rising and falling with the intensity of it all. He blinked, unsure if he was truly seeing what unfolded before him. The crowd wasn't just clapping, they were moved. Some had tears in their eyes. A woman in a red gown near the bar clutched her necklace, visibly shaken. And then Andre turned toward the table that had started all of this. Celine Marquette hadn't stood. She hadn't clapped, but her hands were on the table, trembling. Her champagne glass sat untouched, and her expression, once a cocktail of smug superiority, had fractured. Her eyes were glossy. She stared at Andre like she was seeing a ghost. He approached her table slowly, not as a server, not as someone who needed to speak, but because it felt like something unfinished needed to be closed. Celine blinked and slowly reached into her handbag. The other women at her table shifted awkwardly, clearly unsure how to interpret what had just happened. Victoria, the recently divorced friend, gave a weak chuckle. Well, I guess that went differently than expected. Celine ignored the comment. She pulled out a checkbook. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Andre stood silently. He didn't expect anything. Not money, not recognition, certainly not an apology. But Celine's hand paused on the page. She looked up at him, really looked. The arrogance had gone. What remained was something far more human. "This wasn't what I intended," she said quietly. "I wanted entertainment. I didn't expect that." Andre said nothing. She tore the check from the book and placed it on the table, face up, $1,000. Next to it, she placed a small, embossed business card. Her name, her direct number. No assistants, no middleman. "Call me," she said. "That number goes straight to me." For a long moment, Andre just stared. A week ago, he was calculating whether he could afford his tuition deposit. A night ago, he was wondering if serving this crowd of elites was all life had planned for him. And now, a rich woman who had tried to mess with him was offering him what? A way in? A chance? A gesture of repentance? "I appreciate the tip," Andre finally said, his voice even respectful. "But I didn't play for you. I played because it's who I am." Celine nodded once. "That's exactly why you must call." Before he could respond, a slow voice cut through the room behind him. "Andre?" It was Mr. Langston, the manager of Maison de Lumière. His cheeks were flushed, his ties slightly askew, as if he'd just run in from the back. I didn't know," he stammered. "I had no idea you could play like that." Andre turned to face him, the tension in the room beginning to settle. "I wasn't supposed to," Andre said simply. "Remember?" Mr. Langston looked sheepish. "Well, maybe that was a mistake." He gestured around the room. "You've made quite an impression." Andre smiled faintly, then turned back to piano. He ran a single hand across the keys, gently, almost reverently, then walked away. The restaurant resumed a quieter hum behind him, but something had shifted. As he walked past the line of tables back toward the kitchen, people smiled. Some nodded. A man mouthed, "Thank you." A young server gave him a thumbs up. Even the head chef leaned out of the swinging kitchen door, eyes wide with something close to pride. Back in the staff hallway, Maria stood waiting. "I heard everything," she whispered. Andre raised an eyebrow. "Through the walls?" She grinned. The whole kitchen stopped. "We've never heard that piano sound like that. You played like your life depended on it." Andre exhaled. "Maybe it did." She reached out and tapped the check in his hand. "What are you going to do?" He looked at the business card again. The embossed gold ink caught the dim hallway light. "I don't know," he said, but his voice was steady now. Hopeful. Resolved. Sometimes redemption begins with a phone call we never expect to make. Andre Miles sat on the edge of his narrow twin bed, the rising sun casting pale orange light through his window, spilling across the $1,000 check that still lay untouched on his nightstand. Right beside it, Facing up like a dare was the crisp white business card of Celine Marquette. It had been 3 days since the performance. 3 days since the rich woman tried to mess with a black waiter just to entertain her dinner guests, and instead witnessed something she never expected when he started playing. But instead of feeling triumphant, Andre felt suspended, like a note held too long without resolution. His phone buzzed. "Maria, tell me you called her," she said, not even waiting for him to say hello. "I haven't," he replied, rubbing his forehead. "Not yet." She scoffed. "Boy, she handed you that number like it was a backstage pass to your own future. You gonna let that moment die, or what?" Andre stared at the card again. Call her. The same woman who publicly tried to humiliate him, who threw down a bet like he was just another prop in her private theater, who had cried when he played. He picked up the phone. One ring. Andre. Her voice was softer than he remembered. Unarmored. "I'm calling because you said I should," he said flatly. "And I meant it," she replied. A beat of silence passed before she spoke again. "I owe you an explanation. Maybe more." Andre said nothing, letting the silence ask the question for him. "That night," Celine continued slowly, "I treated you like a game. I won't sugarcoat that. I came to dinner looking for distraction. I thought humiliating someone clever enough to fight back would be amusing." Andre clenched the phone, waiting. "But when you played, something happened." She paused again, and when she spoke next, her voice cracked with vulnerability. "The piece you chose, Chopin's Ballade in G minor, it was the first piece my husband played for me, the night we met. His name was Charles Marquette." The name sank like a stone in Andre's stomach. He knew the Marquette family. Endowment plaques. Symphony programs. Old money that shaped cities. Charles was a pianist. Before he became what he became, wealth changed him. But music, that was always his soul. She took a breath. He died 5 years ago. I haven't been able to listen to that piece since. Until that night, you didn't just play it, Andre. You resurrected something I thought I'd buried for good. Andre was quiet, processing the layers beneath her words. The guilt, the grief, the truth hidden beneath power and pearls. "Why are you telling me all this?" "Because," Celine said firmly, "I want to do something with this moment. Something that honors what you did." And then the twist fell. "I serve on the board of the New Orleans Symphony Gala," she said. "Every year, we hold a fundraising concert. We feature one soloist, the finest young talent we can find. And I want you to audition." Andre almost laughed. "You want a black waiter to play for your black-tie donors?" "No," she said without hesitation. "I want a musician who stopped a room with nothing but a piano. I want someone who doesn't just play notes, but tells a story with his hands." That night, Andre, you told a story that silenced an entire dining room. People forgot their wine glasses. He swallowed. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll come. Saturday, 10 a.m., 2 weeks from now, Symphony Hall." "That's soon." "You'll be ready?" she said. "I already spoke to Professor Whitman." His eyebrows shot up. "You call my professor?" "I told you. I'm trying to do this right." Andre's thoughts swirled. The humiliation, the redemption, the chance. How do I even prepare for something like this? "Your manager at Maison de Lumière agreed to give you 2 weeks off," she said calmly. "Paid. I made the arrangements this morning." He was stunned. "You planned all of this?" "I'm making amends the only way I know how," she replied. "With opportunity. With access. The things you deserve." He leaned back on the bed, eyes fluttering shut. This wasn't just an audition. This was the kind of moment that altered trajectories, that demanded risk. "I'll be there," he whispered. There was a pause. "Thank you," Celine said. "Andre, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I do want to see where your story goes next. Don't waste this." As the call ended, Andre sat there for a long time, his chest still tight, his breath shallow. But something was shifting. Maybe this rich woman hadn't just tried to mess with a black waiter. Maybe, unintentionally, she invited him to take the stage no one ever expected him to stand on. And this time it was his choice. The phone slipped from his hand. He stared at the ceiling. 2 weeks, one chance, and a legacy waiting to be rewritten. The practice room smelled faintly of rosin and sweat. It was nothing glamorous, just scuffed wooden floors, padded walls for soundproofing, and a grand piano with one chipped key. But to Andre Miles, it was sacred ground. 10 days. That's all he had until the audition. Every morning, he met Professor Whitman at 8 a.m. sharp. The retired concert pianist didn't offer praise easily, and that's exactly why Andre trusted him. Their sessions were long, punishing, and surgical. Again, Whitman would say, tapping his baton lightly against the music stand, "Play it like it's the last piece you'll ever perform." Andre poured everything into each note, not just technique, but memory, fear, hope. In the evenings, he stayed long after the campus lights dimmed, his fingers skating across ivory keys until they numbed. He didn't notice the ache at first. Not really. It was just a dull twinge in his right wrist. He iced it, wrapped it, and kept going. Then, 5 days before the audition, he woke up and couldn't lift a coffee mug without searing pain shooting up his arm. "No, no, no," he whispered, flexing his fingers. But they resisted, trembling with every movement. Panicked, he rushed to Professor Whitman. The old man examined his wrist with furrowed brows. "Tendinitis," he muttered. "You've overworked it. Badly. But the audition will be meaningless if you ruin your hand permanently. You need to rest. No piano. 3 days minimum." Andre felt like the air had been punched from his lungs. That evening, he sat in his apartment, staring at the silent keyboard across the room. His thoughts spiraled. What if he couldn't play? What if this was his one shot, and he'd thrown away trying too hard? A knock startled him. He opened the door to find Celine Marquette standing there, dressed down in a navy wool coat, holding a small bag. "You look awful," she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "Sit." Too tired to argue, he obeyed. From the bag, she pulled out a wrist brace, a tube of anti-inflammatory gel, and a bottle of pills. "My husband used to get the same injury before major performances," she said, her voice oddly gentle. This helped. With surprising care, she applied the gel and adjusted the brace onto his wrist. It wasn't just clinical. It felt intentional, personal. As she worked, Andre noticed something small on her inner wrist, a faded tattoo of a music note. She caught his glance. "Charles and I got matching tattoos for our 20th anniversary. He was the music, I was the silence that listened." Neither spoke for a moment. Then she looked him in the eye. "You think this injury is the end of the story? It's not. It's the middle. And the middle is where we fight." He swallowed hard. "What if I fail?" "You won't," she said. "But even if you do, failing at your passion is still nobler than succeeding at someone else's expectations." She stood to leave but paused at the door. "Take one pill to sleep, not before you play, and ice every 2 hours. Understand?" He nodded, suddenly overcome. After she left, Andre sat in silence, the pain in his wrist slowly dulling under the effects of the gel. But inside, something else stirred, not hope exactly, but its precursor, resilience. He couldn't practice physically, but he could prepare mentally. For the next 3 days, he listened to his pieces over and over, his fingers tracing the keys in the air, his eyes closed. He played the music in his mind, not missing a note. When the time came, his body would remember. It had to. Saturday morning broke through the cracks of Andre's apartment window with a somber, gray light. He had barely slept. The tendinitis in his right wrist had retreated only slightly, dulled by the ointment Celine had brought, and the pills he dared not take again before the audition. He flexed his fingers gently. The pain was still there, a faint throb beneath the surface, like a warning tap on the shoulder. His suit hung on the back of a chair, neatly pressed. A second-hand purchase from a consignment shop. It had been altered to fit him by a friend in the music department who owed him a favor. It was the nicest thing he owned. He dressed in silence, his breath shallow, as though he feared even the air would trigger more pain. As he tightened his tie, his reflection stared back at him from the mirror. a black waiter who once blended into background, now about to step into the blinding light. By 9 a.m., he was standing at the back entrance of the New Orleans Symphony Hall. The building loomed above him like a cathedral to everything he'd ever wanted. Inside, the lobby was quiet, echoing with the occasional footstep. A receptionist checked his name and directed him backstage. "You're the last one of the morning," she said kindly, as if she sensed the weight of that detail. Backstage, the waiting area felt like a pressure cooker. 3 other pianists sat in isolated corners. One, a woman in her 40s, paced as though her steps followed the rhythm of an unheard piece. Another, a young man with perfect posture, sat cross-legged, eyes closed, headphones in. The third, an older gentleman, studied his hands like a general reviewing battle plans. Andre sat down, removed his wrist brace, and began massaging his hands slowly. His breath came in controlled waves. He had practiced every single day of the last 2 weeks, harder than he ever had in his life. Yet now, in the final hour, his greatest enemy wasn't skill or memory or even fear. It was his body. The door creaked open. A stage manager peeked in. Andre Miles. He stood. His knees didn't buckle, but they might have if he hadn't leaned subtly against the armrest. "That's me. They're ready for you." He followed the man down a dim hallway, then up a short set of stairs that opened into the wings of the stage. The symphony hall was vast, 1,000 empty seats yawning in front of him like an abyss. The stage light shone down, hot and revealing. A voice boomed from the back of the house. "Mr. Miles, you may begin with your introductions." Andre walked to the center microphone. "I will be performing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor and Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor." As he turned toward the concert grand piano, he caught sight of someone sitting alone in the back row of the audience. Celine Marquette. She was poised, as always, but her arms were folded and her gaze intense, like a general watching a favorite soldier step onto the battlefield. He took his seat, adjusted the bench. His hands hovered above the keys. The piano beneath him wasn't just an instrument today. It was the arena. He started with Chopin. The first few measures were gentle, exploratory. The notes rang out clear and mournful. Each touch of the key was deliberate, his left hand grounding the right, compensating for the injury. As the piece grew in complexity, so did the stakes. His wrist ached, but he pushed past it, embedding the pain into music. Midway through the piece, something shifted. The pain no longer screamed. It whispered, and then it folded itself into the emotion of the ballad, a melancholy that sounded almost biographical. He completed the final crescendo with eyes closed, drawing the last haunting chord out as long as he could without faltering. Silence followed. The judges didn't clap. They never did, but one of them had lowered his pen. That was something. Andre transitioned to Rachmaninoff with no pause. It was a risky move, but the momentum was his shield now. The opening chords thundered to the hall like the declaration of war. His fingers danced with both fury and grace, channeling his sleepless nights, his bruised dignity, the echoes of Celine's cruel challenge, and the echo of applause that had changed his life. When the final chord rang out, he lifted his hands and held them in the air for a moment, then let them fall into his lap. His chest heaved, not from nerves, but from something like survival. "Thank you, Mr. Miles." The same voice from the back said, "We will contact you by Wednesday." He stood and bowed. His right wrist pulsed like a drumbeat. As he exited the stage, Celine met him in the wings. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice low. "Manageable," he said, though he winced slightly. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "You played like someone with nothing left to lose." That's what they'll remember. In the parking lot, her town car was waiting. He hesitated, but she opened the door herself. "Let me take you home." He slid into the back seat, body sore, mind blank. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the symphony hall behind. But not the performance. That would stay with him, and he hoped, with him, for a long time. For once, the pain in his wrist felt earned. The autumn air had turned crisp by the time Andre Miles returned to grand doors of Maison de Lumière. Not as a waiter balancing plates, but as its new resident pianist. 6 months had passed since the night his life had taken a sudden melodic turn. The burnished leaves crunched under his polished shoes as he stepped inside, where golden lighting bathed the marble floors and hushed chatter filled the air. No longer clad in the plain black uniform of waitstaff, Andre now wore a deep navy suit, tailored at Celine Marquette's insistence. It fit him perfectly, a reflection of the new chapter he had begun, a far cry from the double shifts and aching feet that had once defined his nights here. The Steinway in the corner glistened under its dedicated spotlight. Beside it, a new brass plaque read, "Evening Performances by Andre Miles." It was more than a title. It was validation. It was visibility. He flexed his fingers lightly before settling onto the bench. The dull ache from the tendinitis had long subsided, thanks to proper rest medication and a practice regimen designed by Professor Sinclair. The symphony audition had tested more than his talent. It had pushed his limits, forced him to blend pain into power. And though he hadn't been chosen as a soloist, the outcome had been far from a loss. The judges had offered him a position in the Young Artist Program, a prestigious stepping stone that came with scholarship, mentorship, and priceless connections in the music world. As he played the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune, the clinking of silverware and murmurs of conversation softened. Diners instinctively leaned in, giving their attention to music, to the pianists who once carried their dishes. From his bench, Andre caught a glimpse of Celine Marquette, seated at her usual table by the window, a glass of Bordeaux in her hand. She came every Thursday evening now, always sitting just close enough to hear every note. Tonight, she wasn't alone. With her were 2 board members from the New Orleans Symphony, deep in conversation, but attentive to his performance. Celine noticed Andre's glance and raised her glass in silent acknowledgement, her expression warm but measured. Halfway through the set, during his break, the restaurant manager approached with a glass of water. "Full house again tonight," he said with a smile. Mrs. Marquette asked if he'd mind playing the Chopin later. Andre smiled, the memory of that fateful night forever tied to that particular piece. Of course. He stepped away from the piano and was just about to head backstage when a voice stopped him. "Excuse me, Mr. Miles?" He turned to find a young woman standing shyly at the edge of the dining area, apron tied tightly around her waist. She looked no older than 20, with nervous energy radiating from her posture. "I'm Sophia," she said. "I work here. I serve here. Like you used to." He nodded warmly. "Nice to meet you, Sophia." She hesitated, fidgeting with the edge of her apron. "I'm studying voice at the community college. Mrs. Marquette told me about you. She said you might be open to hearing me sing sometime. Maybe even accompany me." A knowing smile spread across Andre's face. Of course Celine had sent her. "Of course," he said gently. "Let's find some time after service one night. You bring the sheet music, I'll bring the keys." Her eyes lit up like stage lights. "Really? That would be incredible. Thank you so much." She hurried back to the kitchen, nearly skipping, and Andre couldn't help but chuckle. The cycle was beginning again. Another hidden talent, waiting for the right moment. He returned to piano just as Celine's table had gone quiet, the board member's attention back on him. He met her gaze for a brief second. She mouthed the Chopin. He obliged. As his fingers found familiar opening notes of Ballade No. 1, Andre reflected on how far he'd come. From the trembling moment he first touched these keys under pressure of a cruel bet, to now, where every note came from freedom, not fear. The music rose and fell like breath, and with it came fragment of every step that led him here. The humiliation, the applause, the pain in his wrist, the long nights practicing until his fingers burned. It had all been for this sense of completeness. When he finished, a hush blanketed the room. Then, slowly, applause rose again. Not out of shock this time, but out of recognition. He was no longer the black waiter who surprised them. He was the pianist they came to hear. Celine stood from her table, crossing the room slowly. She waited until the applause died down, then approached the piano bench. "That piece," she said quietly, "will always sound different when you play it." He looked up at her, and for the first time, She wasn't the rich woman who had once tried to mess with him. She was a widow who had found her way back to the music she lost. "You turned a cruel joke," she whispered, her eyes glinting under the chandeliers, "into a timeless performance." Andre didn't reply. He didn't need to. Instead, he simply turned back the keys and began to play once more. This time, it was a new composition, one he was writing for himself. The final legacy wasn't just in the music. It was in the lives changed, the stages earned, the stories reclaimed. And this was only the beginning. If the story moved you, don't just scroll. Hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. And most importantly, subscribe. We got more powerful stories on the way that expose injustice, celebrate resilience, and remind us all that talent knows no limits. Your support helps keep these voices heard. Be part of the change, one story at a time.